It's a pleasure for me to present a rather, exciting or boring topic. It depends from the perspective that you are on. From us as a company, it's a rather exciting perspective because we are directly linked with our products to, of course, the regulatory perspective. During the presentation, I will also switch off my camera because it's a bit weird at the moment. And in the end, I will put it on again. So the title of my talk today is Biostimulants and Biopesticides, a Regulatory Perspective. But what does that actually mean? And what are biostimulants? And what are biopesticides? And what are biologicals or plant protection products? How do they all fit together in the EU politics, policy, strategies? And in the end, how do we come to laws and to registration processes? This, for me, 3 years ago was a big question mark too. But then our company started to work more with these legal aspects. And now I am better informed, let's say. We also work on some topics actively in the EU, but still there are a lot of black holes where I need to find information to better understand. So for my talk today, I will give you a short introduction to INOQ as a company, then to the EU policy, standardization processes and registration processes. I will try to give you some definitions of the different terms you've just seen and the legal framework that is behind it. And I will try to connect plant protection products and fertilizers and biopesticides versus biostimulants. And in the end, I will give a more detailed insight into the EU fertilizer regulation. Shortly about me, I have already been introduced. So the first 2, 3 topics here were already mentioned. What was not mentioned, that I'm one of the German experts in the standardization committees in the EU and Germany for microbial plant biostimulants. And this is quite important when it comes to legislation, to understand what these committees do to give life to laws and regulations. And my hobbies, as we live in the countryside, which I really love, I have horses and I like to ride and drive the carriage, and I like traveling a lot, as which was already mentioned. INOQ is situated in northern Germany, and our administration and lab is in this old farmhouse, which is very typical for the region. We have 11 sterile workplaces and climate chambers for our work, and laboratories for microbiology and molecular biology. And we understand our whole work as know-how transfer from research to application. So take scientific results and make a product out of it. That's actually the idea of the company. And that is one part. And another part is in a village nearby. This is a screenshot how we look like from the air. So you can see we have 3 foil tunnels in which we do production of plants and of mycorrhiza fungi. And this here, the big complex will be in the new greenhouse, which is built actually right now only for mycorrhiza production. And I think this shows the growing importance of biostimulants, and within this microbial biostimulants in the market. And what we do is we produce, this is our old-fashioned production in these ground beds, and the more modern one is in boxes that can be handled easier. And we do a lot of research in different scientific projects. For example, this is a project on mycorrhiza behavior in tomato production. And in the end, you see that we also do product development, and we have a patent on production and mixing our products with signaling molecules for better performance. Our INOQ products are mentioned in more than 80 scientific publications where it has been used or studied. And this gives us a very good background, let's say, for the efficacy of our products, which has more importance now with the new regulations. Now, coming to the EU policy, you hear a lot about research and innovation, the Green Deal of the EU, but what is really behind it? What is the idea? Here are some key figures. The EU wants to be the first climate neutral continent by 2050, with at least 55 less net greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And they want to plant 3 billion additional trees in the EU by 2030. These are just some key figures. So the EU wants to be greener in future, in the next decades. And the benefits, and this is where we find ourselves with our production, is fresh air, clean water, healthy soil and biodiversity, and healthy and affordable food, because our products are used in agriculture. And so we think that our products have an impact on a healthy soil and therefore on healthy food, which should be affordable, of course. And a next highlight is the farm to fork strategy of the EU, where we find ourselves in a sustainable food production. Related to this is the EU's proposal for a sustainable use directive. It's a proposal for the sustainable use of plant protection products. So at the moment, the EU made a proposal on the sustainable use of plant protection products, which goes back into the European countries, is discussed there, and then with changes will go back to the EU, to Brussels, to discuss further. So you can imagine it takes some time. But how does it work from an idea that someone says, okay, we want more sustainable use of plant protection products, and then how does it become a law, and later everybody is working after these ideas, restrictions? So with an idea, people come together and discuss. And when they finish their discussions, the lawyers sit together and make a law, try to make a law out of that. And with this law, then the EU asks experts, and these experts are organized in the European Committee for Standardization. And you see here the Technical Committee 455 for the implementation of standards for biostimulants. And my colleague Louis Messi and me, we are members of this technical committee. So this is a group of experts from science and industry that are that come from the national standardization bodies. For example, in Germany, it's DIN, the German industry norm. For Spain, it is UNE. For Italy, UNI. For France, it's ANSES. And these are national standardization organizations where a company has to enter this association and pay a fee also. But with this fee, we are allowed to work in this standardization body, and we are sent from the German standardization body to the European Committee for Standardization. And so sitting together here is not open for everybody, but only for those people from science and industry. Well, science people are invited, but from industry, the people you have to pay. It's lobbyism, pure lobbyism, but on the other hand, with this possibility, the industry is able to give their input for standardization of the restrictions or regulations that come from the laws. This is a very important way. It's very democratic, let's say, because it's open to everyone, well, who's willing to pay, but it's not that expensive that it's out of the way that you take part. So when the law says, for example, the plant biostimulant improves the tolerance against abiotic stress, the committees take this sentence and discuss how should this be proved. And in the biostimulants technical committee, we proposed this technical specification: plant biostimulants claims part 3, tolerance to abiotic stress resulting from the use of a plant biostimulant. And in this paper, it is described how you should prove that your product works against abiotic stress. It's a bit complicated to understand, but on the other hand, for registration, you need a description of what has to be proved and how. And in this group, in the technical committee of the CEN 455 for biostimulants, we developed 33 of these technical specifications in altogether 5 working groups. And my colleague and me, we were part of working group 3 to develop the principles, the technical specifications for non-pathogenic and pathogenic microorganisms. And I will explain a bit later what this all means. But now you have an idea about the process from the idea of a European strategy or policy to a standard, because that's important. Otherwise, registration processes do not work. Now, this technical specification then needs to be validated. This is done in ring tests. And after that, it can be implemented as a norm or standard, and is also taken over by the International Standardization Organization, ISO. A lot of people know ISO standardization. And then this is the basis for the registration process. In the end, the aim is to get a CE mark, to get a CE registration for your product, which enables you to trade your product in Europe without any further restrictions. Now we come, this was about the legal framework. Now we come to definitions. What makes a product, a plant protection product, or a fertilizer? The function actually decides about that. A plant protection product is against biotic stress, meaning either against pests or diseases, whereas a fertilizer is against abiotic stress. For a fertilizer, you would rather say it is for plant promotion, which sounds a bit nicer, but in the end, that's the same. So you always have to think, is my product against biotic or abiotic stress? And to put this in words, a plant protection product is a chemical or biological product to protect plants from harm, like insects or rodents, or diseases, for example, fungal infestations. Products against weeds, herbicides, are also considered as plant protection products. And those are regulated in the EU in the Plant Protection Act 1107, 2019. Whereas a fertilizer can be any material of synthetic or natural origin applied to soil or plant tissue to supply nutrients. So it's not against any bad diseases or pests, but it's to supply nutrients to the plant. And these are regulated in the EU Fertilizer Act 2019 out of 2009. But what makes a product a biopesticide, or what can be a biopesticide? I took this from the IBMA, the International Biocontrol Manufacturers Association's website. I think it's a very good explanation. Microbials are either based on microorganisms, including but not limited to bacteria, fungi, protozoans, viruses, and so on and so on. So it's a microorganism. Then we have semiochemicals that are substances emitted by plants, animals, or other organisms used for intraspecies or interspecies communication, like pheromones, for example. Then we have natural substances that are mainly plants, algae, microalgae. It's extracts. They can either be sourced from nature or are nature identical if synthesized. And then we have invertebrate biocontrol agents. They are also called microbials. They are natural enemies, such as insects, as you can see here, the ladybird. They can be mites and nematode species, and they provide control of pest populations through predation or parasitism. So you have these four classes in this category of biopesticides. And a biostimulant is any substance or microorganisms with the aim to enhance nutrient use efficiency, tolerance to abiotic stress, or crop quality trait. I will come later again to these definitions. And a biostimulant can be an algae, can be proteins, soil microorganisms, and humic and fulvic acid. These humic acids, algae extracts, they make the main, they are the main category of biostimulants in the market. And they are against abiotic stresses like cold, heat, drought, salinity, heavy metals, and so on. What is important to remember is that if you have a double function, for example, trichoderma fungi, they can act either as plant protection agents or as biostimulant. They have both effects. If you have a double function, the product is automatically a plant protection product and needs registration after the Plant Protection Act. How does that work? Both categories, biopesticides and biostimulants, can only be placed on the market after registration. For the plant protection product and biopesticides, it's much more complicated, as you can imagine, because they are considered as more toxic and ecotoxic. You have first an EU-wide registration of the active substance. So the substance that is in the plant protection product, which is the active substance against the pest or disease. You register with the European Food Safety Authority. And here you can already see it's Food Safety Authority. So plant protection products or biopesticides are considered to have an effect on the safety of the food. And this is which makes the biggest difference between the registration processes. When you have the registration for your active substance, you let your product register in your own country. So for the product formulations, you have a national registration process. In Germany, you do it with the Federal Office of Consumer Protection and Food Safety. And they give the work, they are the main office, let's say, they gave the work to the German Federal Institute for Risk Assessment, the Federal Research Center for Cultivated Plants, and the German Environment Agency. And here again, you can see you need a risk assessment for the application. Then the Research Center for Cultivated Plants has a look if it's about the efficacy against the pests and diseases, and the German Environment Agency must see whether it's toxic to the environment or not, and whether it is biodegradable and so on. So this is very much related to the work that you do in your projects. And then the next step, if you want to trade your product in EU countries, would be the mutual recognition. This is according to the Act 1107 out of 2009, where the EU is laying down the rules for the mutual recognition in other countries, but only for plant protection products. This is different to fertilizer or biostimulants registration. And there now, only from this year on, we have two different ways on how you can register. Either you register with your National Chamber of Agriculture, this is in Germany, where you get a conformity assessment. This assessment only says, okay, the label that is on the product is conform with the German law. And then with this conformity assessment, you have a mutual recognition, but not according to the plant protection mutual recognition, but to a mutual recognition which contains all products that can be traded within Europe. Here you see the difference between those two, that obviously politics think much different about plant protection products and their impact on consumers and the environment than for fertilizer products. What is new is that a CE registration is possible. This is there you have to do a full registration process. You have to deliver a technical dossier to a notified body for the assessment. And this notified body reports then to the national notifying body. In Germany, it's the Federal Office for Agriculture and Food, where the notified body, which can come from any EU country, for example, our notified body is in Hungary because we don't have one in Germany yet, will assess your product according to the new fertilizer regulation. I will come to this later. I first want to go shortly into the pesticide legislation. I say shortly because we are not working with pesticide products. And so this is not really my topic. I just give here an overview how many regulations need to be considered for the registration of a pesticide product in the EU. For example, the most important one is 1107, concerning the placing of plant protection products on the market, including basic substances. This one regulates the trading, the packaging, labeling, monitoring, control, emergency measures, and so on. And then we also have here the regulation 284 out of 2013 on the data requirement for plant protection products, in according to, again, with 1107. This regulation describes the data requirements that you need to deliver to your authorities about your product. Of course, the physical stage of your product, chemical, technical properties is rather easy. What is really difficult is the efficacy trials, residues in the environment, toxicity and ecotoxicity, as well as phytotoxicity and side effects that you might have. And from this, I think you can already imagine that the data requirements for plant protection products are much, much more than for fertilizer and biostimulants, which gives big discussions within the different organizations, the Industry Biocontrol Manufacturers Council, IBMA, and the other group for the biostimulants, which is EBIC. It's the European Biostimulants Industry Council. Because, as I said, for example, trichoderma has as well a biostimulating as a biocontrolling effect. And why should I register my product for a very, very time and cost-consuming process under the pesticide legislation when it might be easier under the biostimulants or fertilizer registration? At the moment, there's discussion going on about the dual use of such products, but that's not finally regulated yet, because until now we have the idea of the EU and also of the German authorities that a plant protection products might be toxic and biostimulating product not, and therefore it's the authorities that are working for it are from totally different perspectives. I think this is one of the most important things that you have to remember out of this lecture, actually. And for the fertilizer biostimulant registration, as I said, the national conformity assessment is under the national fertilizer law, and then you do a mutual recognition for goods with a conformity assessment in a country should be marketed in another member state of the EU. Sometimes it still needs, it still needs a registration. This implies, for example, for France, ANSES, the French authority dealing with fertilizers, they want a registration, which is much easier now because they also sometimes do it under the Mutual Recognition Act. But still, it's very costly. For other countries, it doesn't cost. You just need the conformity assessment and then you can trade. So there's much difference in the EU regarding the trade, and the new fertilizer law, they wants to make the trading more easy. But also for the first time, it regulates the registration of plant microbial biostimulants with data requirements for quantity, efficacy, and toxicity of the products. Until now, in the German law, the German fertilizer law, any characteristics for biostimulants are not described. It's only the fertilizing perspective, so the nutrient contents and the application for the nutrients that needs to be on the label. So when I put on my product the species name of our mycorrhizal fungi, this is already an add-on. It's voluntarily. I must not do that because under my national law, I just have to deliver data on fertilizers, on nutrients. And this is, of course, for the credibility of biostimulants very bad, because everybody can label a product saying, oh, my product is good for, and without any proof. and the EU regulation 2019 out of 1009 regulates for the first time the characteristics for plant biostimulants. This is a very, very important step for the credibility of biostimulants, and yeah, it will help a lot farmers, consumers to better understand what is behind the effects of biostimulants. Now, coming into the new Fertilizer Act, and this is it is new. I would like to go a bit into more depth into this regulation. So this text that are following now are directly copied from the regulation. I also want to take away the fear from you that regulations are only made for lawyers. This is not the case, especially when it comes to these regulations that are directly linked to plant protection or to plant biostimulants or fertilizers. They are written in a way that you can understand them and that you can work with them. And this is something that I want to show you. For example, it says, for the product function category 6, plant biostimulant, it describes what a plant biostimulant is or should do. It shall be an EU fertilizing product, the function of which is to stimulate plant nutrition processes independently of the product's nutrient content, with the sole aim of improving one or more of the following characteristics of the plant or the plant rhizosphere. And these four, the nutrient use efficiency, the tolerance to abiotic stress, quality traits, or availability of confined nutrients in the soil or rhizosphere, are the so-called claims. And you are only allowed to put this on your label. Excuse me. You label, my product is for the increase of nutrient use efficiency. But if you claim that, you have to prove it. You always have to consider that. If you want to claim something, you have to prove it to get the registration. So this is it's one of the key paragraphs, let's say, of the new Fertilizer Act, that you have to consider for yourself, what does my product do? What is it good for? And you cannot write on your label, my product stimulates plant growth. It's not a claim. And the next thing is that you have to make sure you don't have any inorganic contaminants in it. And here it also says the plant biostimulant shall have the effect that are claimed on the label for the plants specified thereon. This is also a very important aspect. It must be claimed on the label for the plants specified thereon, because you have to prove that. For a microbial plant biostimulant, the definition is, it shall consist of a microorganism or a consortium of microorganisms referred to in CMC 7, part 2 of Annex 2. This is always annoying with regulations, that you have these side comments. So if you want to understand what it means, you have to go to part 2, Annex 2, and have a look what CMC 7 means. We'll come to that later. So these are the microorganisms your product should contain. It's the non-pathogenic microorganisms, whereas these are the microorganisms, the pathogenic microorganisms, your product must not contain. And this is also something that you have to prove. In the regulation, it directly says you have to have a five batch analysis, and 0 of these samples should contain Salmonella, Escherichia coli, and so on. Whereas Enterococci are allowed, as well as yeast and mold and so on. This makes also clear that in a microbial plant biostimulant, it is not considered that you that they could contain phytopathogenic microorganisms. These are human pathogens that are meant here to make sure that the product does not contain microorganisms that are toxic to humans. Ecotoxicity is not us at all in that legislation here, which is a critic also of the biopesticide group, because we must not prove any ecotoxicity in our technical dossier. This is also a difference between the biopesticides and the biostimulants. Coming back to the CMC, you've already heard that. Meant is here the component material categories. You have to describe out of what material your product is. And for example, our mycorrhiza fungi, they contain microorganisms, so it's CMC7. But as they are in living roots or in later dead roots, it's also plant parts or plant extracts. So we have CMC2. And if we have a carrier material, also CMC1 applies, because we have virgin material substances and mixtures. So in my technical dossier, I would need to describe CMC1, CMC2, and CMC7. And then in the legislation, I also have to have a look at what information do I have to deliver. And but this is something, especially for these, where you don't actually have to think a lot. You just have to do your homework. This is different for CMC7, the microorganisms, because a product belonging to the product function category 6, microorganisms, may contain microorganisms including dead or empty cell, non-harmful residual elements of the media on which they were produced, which have undergone no other processing than drying or freeze drying. This is especially important for bacterial formulations, and are listed in the following table. Now, this is important because only these 4 groups are to be registered as microbial plant biostimulants. Species of Azotobacter, Rhizobium, and Azospirillum as bacteria, and the group of mycorrhizal fungi. No bacillus, no pseudomonas. This created big discussions under producers, because of course, when you have a bacillus product, you also want to market it in the EU without restrictions. But bacillus products may also be considered as plant protection products. And so I think the EU wanted to first have a kind of trial run for the first products out of these species to see whether some problems occur. That's my personal idea about it. And of course, my company is happy that mycorrhiza fungi are on it. Otherwise, we would have a big problem. And this list is open. You are allowed to introduce new species into it, but of course, there's data requirement again for it. Yeah, and then the regulation says something about the labeling, what has to be put on the label. And here, for example, I put this here because this is something which number H is difficult for us, because it says a list of all ingredients above 5% by product weight has to be mentioned. And of course, mycorrhiza fungi never weigh 5%. So they are always much under that. The same for bacterial products, only if you have lyophilized bacteria formulations. So this is something where we sent a request to the EU to change that. because the law is not fixed. It's a working document. Whenever you see that something does not work or is nonsense, you can write to the EU and say, this needs to be changed. It takes some time because, of course, then again, all member states have to be asked and they have to comment, and then it comes back and then you have to write it again and so on. But in the end, you can be sure that the EU takes this serious if they think it's a problem, actually. You have to prove that you really, that you cannot work with the document under this respect. And then, of course, you have to provide the information. It shall not mislead the user, for example, by attributing to the product properties that it does not possess. This is what I already said. Here it is, it shall not make claims such as sustainable or environmentally friendly, because that is not a claim. And it shall not make claims by means of statements or visual representations that it prevents or treats plant diseases or protects plants against harmful organisms. This, number D, if you do that, it will kill your product immediately. And I will show you an example later, because many consumers are not aware of that. And then we have product-specific labeling for plant biostimulants, where you have to describe, for example, give the physical form, production and expiry date, and so on. This is rather easy to provide. And the same for the microbial plant biostimulant, you have to add your microorganisms and so on. But this is also mentioned in the technical specifications that we developed out of this text. Yeah. Here you have an example. If you create a new product, think about your claim. If you find a bacteria that's really super for everything, think about what you put on it, because here it says it's rescue and booster spray. So it rescues you against what? Is it a plant protection product? And it boosters at the same time. So it's obviously good for plant growth. From my perspective, this would be a plant protection product, because the plant protection aspect always succeeds over the stimulating effect. So you always have to consider that. And yeah, I hope that I could somehow bring you a bit nearer this rather dry topic. If you have any questions, you're always welcome to come to me and ask. I will try to help. And I wonder if from this lecture, you would now be able to go into a garden center and have a look on fertilizers that you find there, biostimulants that you find there, and see if everything is correctly claimed. I can assure you it's not, because many manufacturers try to make their products more important than they are, and therefore they take also wordings from the plant protection side, and that's not too good if they are caught, because the authorities, they also go into a shop, take products out of the shelf, and and test them and see if everything's declared correctly. And sometimes they come and say, oh, you made a mistake. So this is our company. This is the group. Caroline Schneider, some of them you might already have met. And that's me here. And yeah, that's all the other very nice colleagues in summertime, and which is much nicer than what we have today. Yeah, thanks a lot. I hope it was not too long, but the topic needs some explanations.
Thank you, Imke. No, it was not too long. It was extremely interesting. I think we all benefit from your knowledge in this domain. It was a stimulation, if you can say so.
Thanks.
Demonstration and presentation. So we have a couple of minutes for opening the floor for discussion. So let's start if somebody or colleagues have questions for you. If I can start very briefly, you told in your beginning of your talk that if a product can be considered as a plant protection and biostimulant, then of course it will be considered as a plant protection product.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, of course, about mycorrhiza, because we know that there are so many papers which are published on the role of mycorrhiza in increasing the resistance of the plant against pests and diseases. So how can you explain that for this group we are biostimulants, which is of course nice for us, and that for the other ones, such as Bacillus, you mentioned very clearly that it is not considered a biostimulant?
I guess it's because there are not any registered mycorrhiza fungi yet as plant protection products. No one dared to register mycorrhiza fungi. Because,
do you mean that okay, sorry.
Because I mean, greenhouse tests are always one thing, but I think what you need is a stable performance. And this is something which is also difficult for biostimulants because you have to prove the efficacy. You can prove it in the field, which is much more complicated, or you prove it in pod trials, which is allowed too, and then you get your registration. For the aspect of having mycorrhiza fungi as plant protection products, you're completely right. This is something that everybody fears from producer side, that the policy at politics at a certain stage will say, okay, we have so many publications about mycorrhiza fungi working against something that we will consider it rather as a plant protection product. Then you won't have any mycorrhiza products on the market. I don't think so.
I agree. Which means that if one company one day says to register a mycorrhiza fungi as a plant protection product, from that point, all the products will be necessary plant protection products for mycorrhiza. So it will completely destabilize the market.
We of course, it will make a difference on species level and on strain level. And this is, I think, also the case for Trichoderma, that some are considered as plant protection products. And but then also the specific strain is mentioned. And okay. I guess that this will also be then apply for mycorrhiza fungi, not knowing it, but we will certainly work on that. In the law, it also says when you have a mixture of species, you must be able to demonstrate to how many percentage each species is in your product. And this is okay for mycorrhiza fungi on species level, but still it is difficult to say, okay, it's 20% is this and 20% is that. But on strain level, it's almost impossible. And for this, we also, Louis Messi, my colleague, he also wrote a small paper, let's say, a small review that was sent to the EU. Because in the registration, it says you have to do it also on strain level. And he wrote a review stating for mycorrhiza fungi, this is not possible. Only under very, very highly scientific, sophisticated trials, which is not meant for the registration of biostimulants.
Okay, thank you. Questions? I have another one, but if somebody wants to, if I can say for myself, registration of a plant protection product in Europe, it takes you 8 to 10 years, and in the US, it takes you 1 or 2 years, because they start from the a priori that a plant protection product, microbial product, is less problematic than a chemical product. Is there any direction in the European Commission to go into that direction, meaning reducing the time needed for registration, because 10 years, nobody can afford this. No small and medium company can do that.
It's, I think it's the other way around, because with the Sustainable Use Directive, they want less use of plant protection products. And in Germany, more and more pesticides lose their registration. So, and you know, we are also plant producers. We also have a nursery, and we always have to check for our plant protection products whether they are still have a registration. And I guess that's the direction is more into using less plant protection products and less fertilizer, and to strengthen the biostimulants market, but in a way that the biostimulants have to prove that they meet certain thresholds, let's say, that they have an effect, that what you claim is in there at the quantity that is in there, that is claimed. So you cannot write, I have 17 mycorrhizal species in it, and there has just been a paper released from a group of Finland, I think it was. It's a very recent paper where they investigated products and whether they contain the species that are mentioned. And whether they contain any mycorrhizal species. And this is problematic, that you have still a lot of products on the market that just label something and then but they do not contain it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Does anybody have a question for Imke?
I would like to ask a question.
Camilla.
Hi.
Hello.
Nice talk. I'm just wondering, because I studied a little bit about integrate pest management. I mean, more natural control with insects when I was at the university, and one of the requirement, let's say, to approve some specific technique is that the insect cannot persist then in the environment when it's introduced. What about nematode, for example, introduced in the environment, or bacteria and fungi? I know maybe they persist less in the long term compared to insect or other animal, but I was just wondering about it.
Naya, yeah, I think that's you mean the ecotoxicity aspect. If you accumulate those organisms in the environment, if you use them, that is actually for nematodes. So let me think a bit. That should be mentioned, because you have to make clear in your tests where they go to, let's say, where they what they do to the environment. If they build up a bigger population and these kinds of things. Which is, I think this is one of the big differences also, that for the biostimulants part, ecotoxicity is not considered. It's not asked if we take our mycorrhizal fungi and we propagate them and put them in a field, what happens to the autochthonous fauna and flora. Of course, we consider them as harmless because they are there anyway, but yeah, it might be different with climate change and degraded soils. This is, yeah, I think one of the weaknesses, but I think it's a good step from the EU to have this regulation implemented. And in the foreword, it says that they don't want to have too many hurdles for biostimulants to get a part of sustainable agriculture. Because I think a CE registration will prove the efficacy, and a consumer will always consider that as a good sign, let's say. I would rather buy a product with a CE mark than without. Like, you know, when someone says this is patented or this is certified after ISO standards. even though people might not know what is behind it, but they trust in these registrations.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions or remark or suggestions?
I have a question. Do you have an idea how many new products or how many new permissions are given every year for like biostimulants or for plant protection products in the market?
No. For the biostimulants, I can tell you that it's too early. The fertilizer industry is heavily working on getting the CE mark, but it's much easier for them than for us because we do it for the first time. And also this technical specifications are not yet validated. So you can take your own methods or you could take the drafts of the technical specifications. But the EU just launched last year a call for tender to develop a template for making the technical dossier for a biostimulant, microbial plant stimulant, biostimulants including. This shows that this process is completely new. So we are working on that, but I made a huge matrix of what information do we have to deliver, what do we have, what do we not have, what tests do we have to do, where do we go to, and we discuss with our certifying body how should we do it, and we hope that we will perform the tests this year to give the technical dossier to them in autumn, and then we hope for registration. But this is really, really new. And which is good and bad because you develop the process together with the registration bodies. But on the other hand, you have to invent everything for yourself. You have no templates. So for biostimulants, I would say it's very seldom. Maybe for humic acids and algae, that's a bit easier. But if you don't have the data about the efficacy trials and you have to do them, then you will not find any. And for the plant protection products, you might also look into the national databases. I think that's you find something there too, if you need information.
Thank you.
Anything else for Imke? No.
You can always ask questions later on. It's no problem.
Yes. Can always send a mail to Imke if you have odd questions. Okay, so I want to thank once again Imke for this very nice talk.
Thank you.
We always learn a lot of things about this complexity of regulation for